Well, today's story had quite the last minute update. Right. Creditation. So I've got a question for you. Who made The Last of Us? I mean, obviously it's Naughty Dog and Sony. But if you were to watch the trailer, it would say acclaimed video game with one creator, Neil Druckmann. That's a bit of a problem because Neil Druckmann is not the sole creator of The Last of Us. Actually, there were two co-directors. Neil is one of them, and Bruce Stanley is, bizarrely enough, absolutely nowhere to be seen. So amidst all the chaos that we're going to get into in today's story, we have had the co-director of The Last of Us call for unionization after not getting into the credits for The Last of Us. What, are they just washing over his name and having it only be Neil Druckmann? Like, that's pretty damn bizarre. He said, "It's an argument for unionization that someone who is part of the co-creation of that world and those characters isn't getting a credit or a nickel for the work they put into it. Maybe we need unions in the game industry to be able to protect creators." And I suppose he's a pretty high-profile dude. So if the co-director of The Last of Us gets left off the credits, what hope do a bunch of regular workers in this industry have? Well, to answer that question, gonna hand it off to Matt.
Do you know who makes your video games? Chances are you're going to have the idea of either a publisher or maybe a studio. Very rarely will you, unless it's something like a Kojima game, you're likely not going to think of the people involved. You will maybe be able to think of some developers off the top of your head, maybe some popular ones, especially from back in the day. But that's one thing that we kind of miss a lot of the time. And I think especially as we get into bigger and bigger and bigger video games and larger productions, you lose sight of the people. Unless they're specifically charismatic leaders or something, you kind of lose it. Back in, I guess, in the shorter history of video games, people could be called rock stars of video games. Back in the day, you're thinking people like, John Carmack, John Romero, Ken Roberto Williams, those kind of people who are, codified as the people who made these games. It was an X-person game. Or if you watch the H-Bomber Guy video and the Tommy Tallarico kind of stuff where it's, oh, that's a big name attached. You still get it today in indies with like Mike Bithell and Lucas Pope being attached. But generally speaking, people lose sight that actual humans who make video games, and it's the creative ability of those humans that actually make it what it is. It's not all production pipelines. Production pipelines can help, but it's creator-driven work. As we've often talked about with the discussions of crunch and stuff, it's a lot better for happier, healthier people to work on video games because a lot of the time you get better work, right? The future of video games is in people who are really damn good at stuff. They're really experienced, they've learned for years, they know what they're doing, they've been through like rounds and rounds and rounds in the ring with development. On the other side, they can make absolutely banger games. And I have an incredible example for you later on, but I'll have to get through a few more things first. People are like dealing with the difficulty that massive game development are taking away like names and careers. People aren't being credited enough. And this isn't just you forget the individuals. It's literally you finish a game and not everyone who worked on that game will be in the credits. It's a long-running issue and it's hard to maybe understand exactly how it's impacting you specifically. But in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years of video games, it's going to become a pretty serious problem. We can go back to the first Easter egg in 1980, and it was in a game called Adventure, where you did a bunch of complex stuff and you go into a room and it would spell out created by Warren Robinett. And that's because there was no credits in the game. So Robinett made this Easter egg just to show my name is in that game. If I'm going to make another game or I'm going to show someone who made a game, the only way I can prove it is by saying, here, this is literally my name in the video game. The same thing happened in 2017. Forbes interviewed Atari's new owners, Warner Communication, and they just didn't credit. And you see there's a couple of articles crop up every couple of years nearly, just saying publishers are supposed to put in credits, management are supposed to put in credits, and a lot of times they just don't. And sometimes they have things saying, oh, well, if you leave during development, you don't get a credit. If you're not here on the day we put them together, they're not done. Often the rules for who goes in credits aren't defined, so it is literally just people are forgotten. Just, you weren't there during roll call, people forgot your name, or you were busy that day and you weren't around, stuff like that. Or even contractors, even back with Rockstar in 2007, a producer for Manhunt 2 published a list of 55 names that had been left out, and then 130 people were left out of the credits for LA Noire, and that's a lot of people. Same with when Okami was released for the Wii, Capcom didn't credit the original development team, and obviously that's a good dev team. Clover, who made Okami, that's Hideki Kamiya, that is big names, and they just didn't bother to put them there. And the weird thing about this is the industry kind of knows that you love names, and they like to sell you games based on people's names. You will see Kojima plastered over everything. Neil Druckmann being highlighted as a creator of Last of Us obviously had a very important role in those games and in the TV show now, but fundamentally the game was created by everyone. You look at Amy Hennig, Shigeru Miyamoto, everyone knows that name. I mean, like Final Fantasy 16, that would be an exciting enough event, but the fact that it's Yoshi P on it makes everyone even happier because they know that name means quality. I think the most striking example here I want to talk, because obviously you can go on for years, but Vince Zampella is the fun one to think about, right? Imagine a universe, because obviously Vince Zampella recently has been just tasked with saving EA. He showed up with Respawn to EA, went, right, here's the best games you're ever going to make under the EA label. I will now go and save Battlefield. I will now go and save your entire process alongside with Laura Mill. They're just saving everything. So imagine a world where Vince Zampella was left out of credits because he didn't show up that day. That would be a world where he wouldn't have respawned because people wouldn't know what he did. People wouldn't know that was the person who made those massive changes. It wasn't the creative lead, it wasn't the force for good. Say if he never even got hired at Modern Warfare 2 because he was left out of the Medal of Honor credits even. That would be a world where we don't get Respawn. And this is where you have to talk about like the Pareto principle of 80-20. And it's like 20% of people can have 80% of the results. If those people are left out of credits, if people like, say, Hideki Kamiya or people like Yoko Taro never get credited with their work, you never see the explosion of what they can do as, I guess, as examples for people. You never get to see a world where Respawn have decided to, release genuinely fantastic games and have one of the biggest like battle royales in the world. That is also not just a big battle royale, but also an exceptional game. If you get credited, you'll be able to go forward. You'll be able to make better games. An example, I think, is like if you look at Skull and Bones, right? How many people have left that project because it's taken so long? Are they not going to get credited? Is that the end of their career? How many potential auteurs, how many potential extremely good developers are being left behind? Especially now when it looks like VC funding has made tons and tons of all of these, like, I guess, incredible studios and video games happen. Because there's Aaron Flynn, who's former BioWare general manager for Inflection Games on Nightingale. Sam Barlow, who was a lead designer on Silent Hill Origins and Revelations, now has her story released, and Immortality, an entirely new product. Ikumi Nakamura, the creative director on Ghostwire Tokyo, now has her own independent studio. Whatever made that happen, was able to talk about that game on E3, was able to be credited with that work, and then able to be noticed and move on. And that's the thing that video games aren't letting happen very much today. So ultimately the reason this should matter to you, and this is something you should maybe think about when it comes to, I guess, watching the credits into video games, trying to follow creatives in the industry and see how much this is important, is when people who make games have their work diminished, they're not likely to get better at that career. They're not likely to continue. They're not going to get their due. They're not going to stay in the same industry. They might move on to a different industry. They might go somewhere where they don't need a credit to get a job. When, let's say, if you go from EA to, I don't know why you go to Ubisoft, but you're going to Ubisoft, and maybe you're this incredible dev, you have to say, oh yeah, trust me, I worked in EA. They're like, well, show us your work. I worked on that game. You're not in the credits. We Googled you. We couldn't find anything. And then you go to show them your work and it's all under NDA because it's code from a game or it's artistic work from a game that you don't have a license to show. And then instead of having Vince Zampellas, instead of having Kojimas, instead of having Shigeru Miyamoto's, you just have to continually replace staff with, instead of these people, you get effectively the revolving door of interns, which is a lot of why I think people are theorizing a lot of why video games have so many more issues and so much less general creativity, is that it's studios are throwing bodies against the wall. They're using World War I tactics instead of the tactics of modern war, where instead of highly effective people doing highly effective things, you have a load of people who, by all means, have the potential to be fantastic, but aren't given the time to train, aren't given the skills, aren't given the room to grow. They're just torn through like paper. And I think the strongest example of this, and this is why we're thinking about this, right? It's Striking Distance Studios' Callisto Protocol. There was this prevailing idea of chaotic development environments and a rapidly scaled up studio that went from VC money from a couple people to a lot in no period of time, and that's why the game was a bit why the crunch obviously resulted in the PC launch issues being so bad, and why the publisher was expecting 5 million sales and got like 2 million, which is pretty impressive, but nowhere near what they actually expected. And thanks to Games Industry's Brandon Sinclair, there were 5 developers who weren't in the credits that they spoke to, and the total was about 20 people. There was no policy of crediting allowed whatsoever. The senior developers, leads, and directors were left out. So this isn't just interns. This is people who should, by all means, be credited and then move on to lead something else and have another chance at making a great video game. These employees who worked for over a year in this game, its hand, a significant part of it, weren't credited because management basically decided that when they left, they were betraying the company. That's more or less what it is. It's said that one source described the management circle as vindictive. They were playing favorites with who got credited. If you stuck it to the end, if you saw the whole way through, you got the credit. If you left, even if you left on reasonably good terms, you didn't get the credit. One source said they had a great time working there and had a great relationship with everyone on the team, including the C-suite, including Glenn, the leader. But no, just great job, but they betrayed them at the end. And that's where I think the video games industry is another example of being tremendously short-sighted. Because the example I wanted to talk about was Splatoon. Bear with me, genuinely. The team at Nintendo EAD and EPD who make Splatoon, right? They are said to, and I don't know how much truth there is to this, but you can feel it. It's said to be Splatoon was the first project that basically Miyamoto's interns, the generation that he trained working through different Mario games, through the like Sunshine and Galaxy and stuff, and I guess Odyssey, those new staff that he trained, they were able to make what is now, especially as of Splatoon 3, the second highest selling game in Japan after Pokemon. And you can feel when you play those games, the first one got a little bit messy and kind of got better over time, but you can see that's the power of one team. That's the power of one team being trained, being skilled up, being able to develop. Every single step of the way, playing through the single player campaigns, playing through how the multiplayer is handled, how it's balanced, you can feel excellence, you can feel like joy. You can feel the Mario DNA in a lot of it because they kind of aim for the same vibes, but you can feel that those are people who stuck to it. They were credited fully. They were even given, like, I think they all illustrated their own names and credits, at least the Japanese side in Splatoon 2. To me, it was them looking to the future and trying to build up the new wave of talent, trying to build up the people who would make the games of the future, and that's resulted in it's obviously the West doesn't care about it too much, but Splatoon 3 is a cultural powerhouse in Japan. And obviously, if you look at the origin of video games, that's where, I guess, a lot of the strongest video games in the West came from too. It was these incredible bursts of million sellers in Japan that just knew how to do game design right because they were taught properly. And that's what the AAA industry, and that's what a lot of this like accreditation stuff is going wrong. It doesn't actually think about the future of video games. It doesn't think about what we'll be playing in 10 years. It thinks about what we'll be spending money on in the next week, I guess in this fiscal year. It's funny that we kind of came to this thinking about credits, but it's about the people who make games getting better and being able to stick through it. Splatoon 3 is a perfect example of that, but there's so many others. The Zampella example is perfect. Imagine a world without Vince Zampella. Imagine a world where Konami didn't credit Kojima, not even Metal Gear Solid, with Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, and then he never got to make Policenauts or Metal Gear Solid, and then ultimately never got to make Death Stranding. I'm not even the biggest fan of Death Stranding's like whole, it's a new genre, but we'd be worse off without it, and with the way the industry's going and things like this, we will be considerably worse off without it. So hopefully, next time you get to voice your opinion on this, you'll know that I think people deserve credit, because that's how they get another job, that's how they get better, and that's how video games actually become goddamn good again, instead of whatever the hell they are now. I'm mostly saying that because I recently saw an image on Twitter of a collection of AAA games and the equipment and gear screens. We went wrong somewhere. And I think by having individuals who have credits, the ability to keep going and make better and better games, I think that's the only way we'll skip that. Not to be all doom and gloom. It's actually pretty good. There are some fantastic video games. It's just, you'll know where they're coming from. They're coming from people with experience. That's it for today. This was a bit of a weird one, but I hope you enjoyed it. We will see you tomorrow with more video game news and discussion.